Hello everyone, and welcome to the Smiling Frame channel. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you enjoy our content. Today, we're going to be discussing the 2010 film Predators. The air was thick with the humid scent of jungle, a stark contrast to the concrete canyons. Royce, a man whose background in Special Forces operations clearly showed in the coiled tension of his movements, was accustomed to. He awoke abruptly, finding himself plummeting, the ground rushing up far too fast for comfort. Around him, others shared his terrifying descent. Isabel, a sharp-witted Mossad operative whose quiet professionalism spoke volumes about her years navigating international shadows. The imposing Yuri, a seemingly indestructible Spetsnaz veteran. Edwin, a somewhat nervous, ostensibly pacifist physician, and a handful of others, each a specialist in some form of deadly craft, from Yakuza enforcers to cartel executioners. They landed hard, scattered across an alien landscape that screamed danger. It quickly became apparent they were not simply lost, they were deliberately placed. The environment was engineered, a vibrant but ultimately lethal game preserve. Royce, taking immediate command, possessed the innate leadership of someone who has given orders in the heat of battle countless times. He assessed the group, a collection of apex predators, though not the ones controlling the hunt. The realization dawned slowly, solidified when they discovered a chilling totem hanging high in the trees, a massive, unsettling trophy. The true hunters revealed themselves soon after. They were the Predators, creatures of immense strength, technological superiority, and an ancient code of honor tied to the thrill of the chase. These weren't the confused, stranded predators of previous encounters. These were organized, equipped with cloaking devices that rendered them nearly invisible, and wielding plasma casters and razor-sharp wrist blades. The initial clashes were brutal massacres. The Yakuza soldier and the falconer, a man clearly used to hunting things from the air, were among the first casualties, their specialized skills proving utterly inadequate against the alien weaponry. As the disparate group fled deeper into the jungle, suspicion festered. Edwin, the doctor, seemed oddly knowledgeable about certain aspects of their predicament, his composure too steady for a man thrust into such chaos. It was Isabel who recognized the pattern of the hunt, drawing upon her intelligence training to understand that their captors were not merely killing for food, but for sport, using humans as the ultimate quarry. Their sanctuary was short-lived. They found an anomaly, a predator that was clearly an outcast, perhaps disgraced, or simply different. It was larger, slower, and visibly wounded, using primitive weapons. This unexpected variable offered a glimmer of hope. When this bad-blood predator attacked the main hunting party, Royce and the survivors seized the opportunity to fight back against their primary tormentors. The climax led them to a clearing dominated by a massive, camouflaged ship, the predator's mobile base. Here, the true dynamic of the hunt was exposed. The creatures were using the terrain and their technology to maximize the terror of the chase. It was here, in the final, desperate confrontation, that the survivors began to turn the hunters' own rules against them. Yuri, in a final act of defiance, detonated his remaining explosives, taking a creature with him, a testament to the ferocious spirit of the Russian military. Royce, along with Isabel and the remaining survivor, managed to turn the tables, utilizing the environment and the unique psychological weaknesses of their pursuers. They managed to disable and capture one of the hunters, forcing it into a confrontation where brute strength, stripped of technological advantage, could determine the victor. Royce, channeling the primal survival instinct honed through years of warfare, fought the alpha predator hand to hand, culminating in a victory achieved not just through skill, but through an almost desperate understanding of what it meant to be the dominant species in any given ecosystem. Their escape was uncertain. As a rescue craft, which turned out to be another predator vessel, hovered overhead, ready to usher the survivors into another unknown game, Royce looked back at the alien jungle, no longer a victim, but a proven survivor who had navigated the ultimate foreign deployment, carrying the grim knowledge that, in this universe, humanity was often merely livestock, waiting for the season to begin. The descent was violent, a chaotic introduction to an environment deliberately designed to strip them of their established identities. Royce, his eyes already scanning the unfamiliar canopy, felt the ingrained discipline of his military past immediately asserting itself. He was a man who thrived when the chain of command broke down, someone whose career was built on making impossible, tactical decisions under extreme duress. His silence was not passivity, it was calculation. Isabel, brushing dirt from her tactical trousers, moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that information was the most potent weapon. Her experience as a government operative meant she analyzed motivations instantly. She saw the hunt not just as physical danger, but as a complex psychological trap. The sheer brutality of the initial deaths, the sudden vanishing acts followed by gruesome discoveries, only sharpened her focus. Yuri, the Spetsnaz specialist, was a study in hardened aggression. His bulky frame suggested brute force, but his movements retained a coiled deadliness, the legacy of decades spent operating in environments where mercy was a fatal liability. His eventual, explosive sacrifice was not surprising. For men like him, death on one's own terms, taking an enemy along, was the final act of control. The true horror settled in when they understood they weren't facing panicked extraterrestrials, but highly sophisticated hunters operating under strict, albeit alien, rules. The predators employed sophisticated camouflage, shimmering distortions in the air that betrayed their presence only momentarily, a technological veil that mocked the camouflage training of men like Royce. When they finally encountered the first body, left hanging like macabre holiday decoration, the realization hit. This was a zoo, and they were the prize specimens. Edwin's behavior grew increasingly suspect. While the others reacted with fear and rage, the physician displayed an almost detached academic interest. He possessed a chilling familiarity with the biological implications of their predicament, suggesting a past that involved much more than prescribing antibiotics. It was this hidden knowledge, this undercurrent of manipulation, that hinted at layers to the plot far deeper than a simple alien abduction. Their brief alliance with the falconer, the wounded, exiled predator, was born out of sheer desperation. This creature, fighting with cruder, more physical weapons, represented a deviation from the technologically pristine hunters. It provided a brief, crucial lesson. The predators, despite their advancement, could be forced into a fair fight, reduced to the level of primal combatants if their toys could be taken away. The jungle itself seemed adversarial, a deliberate obstacle course designed by their unseen wardens. The narrative of the hunt became a desperate scramble for elevation and defensible positions. Royce, recognizing that conventional warfare was useless, began advocating for asymmetrical tactics, using traps, exploiting the environment's harshness, and relying on the specific, niche skills of his unwilling team members, skills they had honed, surviving human conflicts, not alien ones. The final confrontation at the high camp, a massive structure hidden beneath a sophisticated optical screen, was a chaotic melding of human ingenuity and raw survival instinct. The climax was less about firepower and more about stripping the aliens of their technological advantage. Royce's drive to survive was palpable. It wasn't just about escaping, but about proving the worth of his species against the arrogance of the hunters. His ultimate victory over the alpha predator, achieved after he was forced into hand-to-hand combat in the mud and steam of their landing zone, was the ultimate validation of his brutal, pragmatic existence. He became, temporarily, the apex predator by sheer, bloody-minded will. The arrival of the rescue ship, revealed not as salvation, but as the next stage of collection, leaves a lingering, bitter taste. The realization that survival is only ever temporary, a brief intermission before the next, inevitable hunt begins. The transition from parachute deployment to forced survival was agonizingly swift. Royce moved through the dense foliage with the practiced ease of a ghost, his gaze constantly sweeping the vertical dimensions of the jungle, a habit ingrained from years spent observing threats from above and below in hostile theaters. He carried the weight of command without asking for it, a quiet authority that stemmed from never having panicked when failure meant immediate death for his subordinates. He was the definitive survivor, forged in the fires of human conflict, now confronting a challenge that demanded he abandon all learned doctrine. Isabel, conversely, dealt with the terror through meticulous cataloging. Her Mossad background demanded pattern recognition. She was looking for the enemy's supply lines, their command structure, anything that spoke of organization beyond random violence. She viewed the predators not just as monsters, but as a hostile force operating with predictable inefficiencies. Her reserve was a shield, protecting the sharp, analytical core that allowed her to function when others were paralyzed by fear. The realization of the scale of the operation, that they were on an entirely different planet, a massive game preserve, crushed the remnants of any hope for immediate rescue. The Yakuza soldiers' desperate, futile attempt to establish dominance through violence only served to illuminate the chasm between human lethality and alien superiority. His death was a stark lesson. Human expertise in killing did not translate when the equipment favored the other side so overwhelmingly. Edwin's unsettling calm became a focal point of growing distrust. He possessed an unnerving knowledge of exotic pharmacology and battlefield triage, skills that seemed overly specialized for a simple family doctor. There was a flicker in his eyes during moments of extreme danger, a thrill that suggested he saw this whole affair less as a threat and more as a unique, terrifying field study. This ambiguity made him perhaps the most dangerous presence in the group, a potential variable that could unravel their fragile cohesion. The pivotal moment arrived when they encountered the exiled predator, the Bad Blood. This creature, bearing crude scars and relying on archaic weaponry, represented a crack in the flawless facade of their tormentors. It was a lesson in hubris. Even the most advanced species could harbor internal dissent or deviation from the norm. Fighting this outcast offered a chance for the humans to practice fighting without being instantly vaporized by plasma rifles, allowing Royce to test the mettle of his fractured team in a near-equal contest. Yuri, always operating on the razor's edge of controlled violence, saw the Spetsnaz perspective. If they could not win, they would maximize the cost of their demise. His final act, a defiant suicide charge rigged with explosives, was a masterclass in tactical denial, ensuring that at least one part of the alien trophy collection would be ruined by his refusal to be displayed cleanly. Royce's transformation into the ultimate hunter-survivor was gradual, but inevitable. Stripped of his tactical advantages, he reverted to pure instinct. He learned to anticipate the shimmer of the cloaking field, not by sight, but by the subtle way the air currents shifted, the minute sounds of displacement. When he finally faced the alpha predator, it was a clash not of technology, but of sheer will, a primal wrestling match on alien soil. Royce did not defeat the creature by being stronger, but by being more adaptable, utilizing the alien's own reliance on technology against it, forcing the confrontation into the brutal, mud-caked reality of physical proximity, where human grit, honed by millennia of terrestrial struggle, could momentarily triumph over extraterrestrial engineering. The final image of the rescue ship, not a benevolent savior, but another vessel belonging to the very system that captured them, underscored the bleak philosophical underpinning of the entire experience. Royce, standing battered but alive, understood that he had simply won a single round in an eternal tournament. His victory was just a temporary deferral of the next inevitable cull, cementing the notion that for creatures like them, survival was merely the act of proving one's worthiness to be hunted another day. The sudden, jarring ascent into the belly of the predator vessel was less a rescue and more a transition to the next cage. Royce, his body aching with the deep, bruising soreness of alien combat, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline replaced by a cold, sinking dread. Isabel, maintaining her rigid posture, even while being levitated by some unseen force, kept her eyes fixed on the interior architecture, too utilitarian, too specialized for anything that resembled comfort or negotiation. They were not being saved, they were being processed. Inside the cavernous holding bay, the air was sterile, a shocking absence of the jungle's oppressive humidity. Here, the chilling scope of the predator's operation became horribly clear. This was not a single hunting ground, it was a network. Scattered around the immense chamber were other survivors, plucked from various eras and worlds, judging by the wildly disparate attire and weaponry resting near them, a haunting collection of failed hunts and future prospects. The implication was suffocating. Humanity was not unique in this cosmic sport. The figure who approached them was clearly not one of the standard hunters. This predator was adorned with more intricate trophies, its armor suggesting seniority, perhaps even command over the entire preserve operation. Its movements lacked the aggressive swagger of the warriors they had fought. Instead, there was a measured, almost bureaucratic air about it. Royce instinctively tensed, ready to spring, but the sheer, overwhelming nature of the environment made physical resistance seem futile before it even began. Isabel's sharp intake of breath confirmed her worst suspicions. This was about data collection as much as sport. These creatures were studying them, refining their methods, ensuring the next batch of human prey would be even more challenging, more entertaining. Their survival thus far was merely proof of concept, that humans, when pushed to their absolute biological and psychological limits, could produce a worthy spectacle. Royce felt a profound sense of disillusionment settle over him. He had mastered the jungle, defeated the Alpha, only to find that his victory was scripted. His entire career, dedicated to outmaneuvering the most dangerous human adversaries, felt suddenly small and provincial. He had proven humanity's capacity for ferocity, but that ferocity was just another flavor offered on the Predator menu. As the next stage of their induction began, being stripped of their captured gear and ushered towards individual containment cells, Royce locked eyes with Isabel. There was no need for words. The shared understanding passed between them was absolute. They had survived the hunt, but now they faced the captivity, the long-term consequence of having been deemed worthy prey. The silence in the ship was more deafening than the gunfire of the jungle, suggesting the ultimate, terrifying truth. The real game hadn't ended. It had merely moved to the observation deck. They were now exhibits, waiting for the overseers to decide when and where the next season would open. The transition from the bloody earth to the cool, metal interior of the Predator craft felt like a betrayal of their struggle. Royce, whose entire being was calibrated for the unpredictable chaos of a combat zone, found the smooth, almost silent efficiency of their transport profoundly unsettling. It suggested a level of control he hadn't accounted for, a logistical framework supporting the hunt that stretched far beyond the confines of the jungle they had just escaped. His muscles screamed a protest that the sterile environment seemed determined to ignore. The holding bay was a terrifying gallery of potential and failure. Looking around at the other survivors, a man in what looked like medieval armor, another wearing the frayed remnants of a World War II uniform, and several others whose origins were instantly alien, Royce understood the true meaning of the Predator's technological reach. They weren't just hunting the contemporary elite, they were harvesting across time and space. This realization chipped away at the hard-won confidence he'd earned by besting the Alpha. His victory had been localized, a temporary anomaly in a vast, indifferent system. The commanding Predator, the one supervising their intake, moved with a dreadful economy of motion. Its presence was authoritative, less the swagger of a warrior, and more the detached scrutiny of a curator examining valuable, if dangerous, specimens. It was analyzing their performance, judging the quality of the fight they had put up. For Royce, the man who had always sought to be the unseen strategist, being openly appraised felt like the ultimate humiliation. Isabel's silence was heavy with unspoken analysis. She was mapping the ship in her mind, looking for structural weaknesses, for patterns in the enemy's logistical behavior. But the sheer scale of the operation suggested resistance was not an option yet. Her training taught her that intelligence gathering in captivity was paramount. Every glance, every hum of the machinery was a data point for a future escape. Yet, facing this organized intertemporal kidnapping ring, her usual confidence was strained by the sheer impossibility of their situation. Edwin, surprisingly, seemed to adapt with an almost unnerving ease to the sterile environment. While the others were reeling from the shock of capture, the physician was observing the ship's ventilation and power conduits, a morbid curiosity fueling his stillness. It reinforced Royce's earlier suspicion. Edwin was not merely a victim. He was perhaps an enthusiast who had finally found his ultimate subject matter. Royce felt the corrosive nature of their current predicament attacking his core identity. He was a man defined by his ability to impose order on disorder through decisive action. Here, there was no action possible, only compliance under watch. The knowledge that the Alpha he'd killed was just one tool, one variable, in a much larger recurring event, stripped his recent triumph of its glory. It was the ultimate narrative reversal. The hero wins the battle only to discover the war is run by the enemy's accountants. As they were guided toward the containment units, Royce knew his immediate goal shifted entirely. Escaping the jungle was about immediate survival against brute force. Surviving the ship was about psychological endurance against calculated oppression. He had to maintain the illusion of defeat, hiding the spark of defiance that still burned. The understanding that if he ever got loose on this vessel, his fight would not be against a single creature, but against the entire infrastructure of their galactic game lodge. The journey ahead would demand not tactical prowess, but the cunning of a caged animal waiting for the right moment to tear its way out of the cage floor. The metallic clang as the containment door slid shut behind Royce echoed with finality, a sound infinitely more oppressive than the roar of any plasma weapon. The cell was minimalist, designed for observation, not habitation. Royce leaned against the cold wall, letting the shock recede, focusing instead on the minute imperfections of his new prison. His senses, sharpened by the jungle, now strained against the artificial silence, searching for the slightest vibrational anomaly that might betray the ship's internal workings or the patrolling patterns of their captors. Isabel, confined to an adjacent, similarly sterile cell, communicated not through voice, but through the precise angle of her posture. Her stillness was a form of silent resistance, an act of defiance in a space designed to crush individuality. For her, the captured gear now stored elsewhere represented lost potential, weapons denied. She was running scenarios in her mind, prioritizing weak points in the ship's layout, a task made infinitely harder by the advanced, unfamiliar technology surrounding them. Royce reflected on Edwin. The physician's quiet acceptance during the boarding process now seemed less like shock and more like satisfaction. Royce suspected Edwin viewed this as a grotesque promotion, a chance to study exotic biology up close, perhaps even collaborate with the hunters on refining the next generation of prey. Such specialized, chilling self-interest was a uniquely human flaw that the predators seemed to exploit ruthlessly, sorting the truly desperate from the merely terrified. The initial hours aboard the vessel were a psychological gauntlet. The predators were experimenting with environmental shifts within their cells, sudden drops in temperature, bursts of disorienting light, brief flashes of sounds from past hunts, all designed to fracture their mental fortitude. Royce countered this by retreating into his training fundamentals: controlled breathing, mental mapping of his own body's condition, and ignoring everything he couldn't directly influence. He had learned long ago that mental control was the last bastion of freedom when physical freedom was lost. He remembered the alpha predator's dying moments, the look of pure, untainted rage when it realized a mere human had bested it through sheer improvisation. That moment of alien vulnerability was the only true leverage he possessed. They had underestimated the tenacity bred by constant, lower-stakes warfare on Earth. The irony was bitter. The decades humanity spent perfecting self-destruction had inadvertently created the perfect fighting stock for this cosmic sport. As the observation cycle continued, Royce noticed a pattern in the senior predator's visits. It lingered longest near the evidence of their recent fight, the salvaged pieces of alien weaponry they had managed to hold onto before being subdued. It wasn't just about caging them, it was about studying the methods by which their technology was countered. They were reverse engineering the defeat. The chilling realization settled. If they were to escape, it wouldn't be by overwhelming force, but by exploiting the predator's arrogance, their certainty that they controlled the entire narrative. Royce and Isabel needed to signal their enduring threat, to become problems too expensive and unpredictable to keep in storage. They were no longer just fighting for their lives in the jungle. They were beginning the long, dark campaign of warfare against the entire alien facility, brick by cold, metallic brick. Survival here meant proving to their captors that harvesting them was more trouble than it was worth. The monotony of containment was a grinding erosion of the spirit, far more insidious than the sharp violence of the hunt. Days bled into nights, marked only by the rhythmic cycling of the ship's internal lighting and the measured appearances of the supervisory predator. Royce found himself obsessively tracing the seams of the floor plating, his focus narrowing to the infinitesimal gaps where reality bent to the alien's will. The jungle had been a natural opponent. This metal cage was an artificial construct designed specifically to negate human resilience. Isabel, ever the analyst, used the enforced stillness to conduct her own internal surveillance. She began recognizing subtle shifts in the hull's vibration, correlating them with the brief, muffled sounds emanating from other cells. She theorized that the various survivors were being subjected to different stimuli, testing varying psychological pressure points. If they could communicate, even implicitly, they might form an early resistance cell. She watched the supervisory predator's gait, noting the slight favoring of its left leg, a souvenir of the fight Royce had instigated, even if the victory was only partial. The specter of Edwin loomed large in Royce's thoughts. He had seen the doctor exchange a moment of silent acknowledgement with the supervisory predator before being led away to a separate section of the ship, a gesture that spoke volumes about his alignment, however cynical. It suggested Edwin had negotiated his status from the very beginning, trading potential victimhood for a role as an expert consultant on human behavior under duress. This betrayal stung worse than any physical wound. It confirmed that the human capacity for self-preservation could manifest as collaboration with the ultimate oppressor. Royce realized their window of opportunity would not come from a massive external rescue, but from an internal system failure, likely precipitated by their own actions. He began testing the boundaries of his cell in subtle ways, not brute-forcing the lock, which would only invite immediate, lethal intervention, but by observing how the energy field reacted to minute amounts of conductive material he managed to scrape from his own damaged boot heel. He was looking for the precise threshold between irritation and emergency response. One cycle, the supervisory predator brought back a selection of items confiscated from the group: Yuri's shattered detonator components, a piece of Isabel's specialized sidearm, and a shard of the Bad Blood Predator's primitive weapon. The alien arranged these objects meticulously on a floating tray, pausing conspicuously near Royce's cell. It wasn't just showing off, it was showcasing the futility of their efforts. Yet, in that display, Royce saw the inherent weakness of the Predator Code. They valued the trophies, they revered the challenge, and therefore they could be baited by challenging them further. He finally allowed himself a small, controlled outward expression, a low, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated rage, something primal that bypassed language. It was a calculated risk. The ship's monitoring systems instantly spiked. The supervisory predator paused, its head tilting, registering the intensity. It was a message. I am not broken. I am simply reloading. In that shared moment of confrontation across the energy barrier, Royce felt a surge of his old battlefield certainty. He hadn't won the war, but he had successfully reasserted himself as a viable threat, ensuring that when the next stage of the game began, it would be on terms slightly more favorable to the unpredictable, stubborn animal from Earth. The calculated outburst had the desired effect, momentarily shifting the predator's detached scrutiny to focused attention. The supervisory figure lingered near Royce's cell for an extended period, its multifaceted eyes seemingly drilling into his resolve. It was a clear acknowledgement that this particular specimen possessed a refractory quality the others might lack, a stubbornness that made for better sport. Royce maintained the intense gaze until the alien finally retreated, the energy barrier humming slightly louder in its wake, a subtle sign of increased power allocation to his containment unit. The subsequent shift in routine was noticeable. Instead of isolation, the next phase involved a brief, controlled interaction with Isabel. The energy field between their cells flickered, dropping just enough for them to speak in low, strained voices without being instantly targeted. This was not benevolence. It was environmental testing. They were being evaluated for cooperative or antagonistic behavior under duress. They are studying our communication, Isabel murmured, her voice tight. They want to know if we form complex resistance networks quickly. Yuri's distraction bought us time, but we are still inventory. Inventory needs to damage the shelves, Royce countered, rubbing a spot on his wrist where an identification band had been forcibly affixed. He felt the smooth, alien polymer keenly, a constant reminder of his subjugation. Edwin is the leak. We need to find out what he's selling them. Isabel nodded, her eyes flicking to the optical sensor she'd identified near the ceiling. He's the insider threat. If we ever get a real chance, he's a priority target. He knows their rules better than we do now. Their brief communication confirmed a shared objective. Survival was predicated on disruption. They began a painstaking nonverbal exchange, mapping out potential blind spots by synchronizing their movements. Royce would subtly shift his weight against the wall, precisely when Isabel would test the floor plating, creating a synchronized, albeit microscopic, stress pattern on the ship's sensors. They were trying to overwhelm the monitoring system with meaningless noise, hoping to mask a significant action later. The sheer scale of the Predator infrastructure, glimpsed briefly during their transport, suggested they were on a massive vessel, perhaps even a mobile facility moving between hunting grounds. This vastness implied complex internal divisions, different departments handling processing, trophy storage, and hunting logistics. If they could reach the area handling their confiscated equipment, they might regain critical tools. Royce found himself thinking less like a soldier and more like a cornered animal, focused entirely on escape vectors, food-water deprivation schedules, though they were being fed a bland nutrient paste, and the psychological profiles of his jailers. His military discipline, which had once been about executing ordered attacks, had transmuted into an absolute mastery of patience and observation. He was waiting for the inevitable overconfidence of the hunters to manifest, the moment they assumed their prisoners were sufficiently broken. The silence returned, heavier this time. Royce closed his eyes, visualizing the alien ship's schematics he was building piece by piece in his mind. He knew that escape wouldn't be a triumphant charge. It would be a desperate, ugly scramble through service tunnels and access shafts, fighting the technological environment more than the aliens themselves. He had survived the hunt. Now he had to survive the cage, and that required becoming profoundly, unnervingly still, a dead branch waiting for the wind to shift. The prolonged stillness of incarceration eventually bred a desperate need for action, manifesting in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Royce began treating his confinement not as a waiting room, but as a prolonged period of intense, specialized training. He focused on maximizing his physical output within the confined space, pushing his body through agonizing calisthenics designed to maintain peak readiness, even as his muscles begged for the release of a proper fight. Every repetition was a silent refusal to atrophy, a declaration that his physical capability was not theirs to claim. Isabel, meanwhile, had become obsessed with the energy signature of the containment field. She believed the intermittent power fluctuations they experienced were not random tests, but rather the result of the ship diverting power for other, more critical functions elsewhere, perhaps preparing a new hunt zone or processing prior captives. She used a small, almost invisible sliver of metal she'd managed to keep embedded in the sole of her boot, a piece of shrapnel from the initial crash landing, to carefully map the field's oscillation frequency. Her goal was not to break the field, but to predict its momentary dips in intensity, creating fractions of a second where a desperate lunge might not result in immediate electrocution. The mystery of Edwin deepened as the ship's routines became more predictable. During one of the supervisory Predator's cursory checks, Royce noticed Edwin being escorted through a transparent corridor nearby. The physician was not in restraints. He was consulting, gesturing towards data screens displaying complex bio-readouts that Royce recognized from the brief, panicked glimpses he'd caught of captured data pads in the jungle. Edwin wasn't just a collaborator. He seemed to be an integral part of the Predator's quality assurance process, ensuring the human stock remained genetically and psychologically viable for future contests. The realization cemented Royce's decision. Edwin's survival was mutually exclusive with their own. The opportunity for communication arrived during a scheduled nutrient delivery, a routine so automated that the force field momentarily stabilized at a lower threshold during the injection sequence. Royce timed his next move with agonizing precision. As the nutrient slurry entered his cell, he lunged forward, not to grab the food, but to slam his shoulder against the specific point on the wall Isabel had indicated during their coded exchanges, a known structural weak spot adjacent to a power conduit. The resulting localized surge wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough. The energy field sputtered, dropping to near zero for perhaps 1 full second. In that instant, Royce lunged through the gap, ignoring the searing heat radiating from the conduit housing. He reached Isabel's cell just as her barrier flickered back to full power, throwing him against her momentarily before her own field stabilized. "Now," Royce gasped, wiping sweat and ozone from his eyes. Isabel didn't hesitate. She hadn't been testing the floor. She had been testing the junction where the wall met the ceiling panel. Using the momentary overload caused by Royce's impact, she jammed the metal sliver from her boot heel directly into the panel's seam. A cascade of sparks erupted, followed by a complete, though localized, power failure in both cells. They were free, standing in the sudden, unnerving darkness of their section of the ship, cut off from the immediate electronic surveillance. The silence was broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing and the low, distant hum of the still-functioning main systems, the sound of a colossal, alien machine that had just noticed a minor, localized short circuit. The game, finally, was becoming unpredictable again. The sudden darkness was a gift, albeit a temporary one wrapped in the terrifying uncertainty of an unknown environment. Royce moved instantly, reverting to the deep-seated instincts honed in black operations where ambient light was a luxury rarely afforded. He pressed himself flat against the wall near Isabel, their shoulders brushing in the cramped space, a silent acknowledgement of their renewed partnership. The failure in their immediate sector triggered no immediate alarm, a small victory suggesting the predators relied heavily on automated systems that took time to flag anomalies outside established parameters. "Ceiling access," Isabel whispered, pointing towards the sparking panel she had sabotaged. Her Mossad training emphasized utilizing systemic failures. A downed sensor was a door swinging slightly ajar. She pulled a small, flattened metallic tool, likely fashioned from something mundane she'd hidden during the transfer, and began prying at the panel's edges, working with the focused intensity of a safecracker. Royce became the sentinel. His gaze pierced the gloom, trying to interpret the faint emergency lighting filtering in from distant corridors. He scanned for the telltale shimmer of cloaking, for the heavy, rhythmic footfalls that preceded the hunters. He was hunting again, but the terrain was now hostile technology, and his quarry was the very structure designed to contain them. He needed to find the main conduit junction, the ship's nervous system, and hit it hard enough to cause a system-wide reboot, or better yet, a localized hull breach. Their precarious freedom lasted perhaps 5 agonizing minutes. A distant, deeper humming signaled the activation of emergency protocols. The supervisory predator, alerted by the power draw fluctuation, was undoubtedly mobilizing. Royce knew they had only enough time to move to the next junction or be swiftly subdued. "The utility shaft leads toward the cargo hold, maybe near where they stored our weapons," Royce muttered, his voice rough from disuse. "If we can get back to the gear, we level the playing field slightly." They slipped into the narrow maintenance crawl space, the air thick with the smell of hot circuitry and alien lubricant. It was claustrophobic, demanding they move in a slow, staggered crawl. Isabel took the lead, using her smaller frame to navigate the tight turns, while Royce followed, using his larger build to cover their rear, ready to use his body as a physical barrier if a hunter decided to follow them into the ducts. As they navigated the maze, they encountered the true horror of the Predator operation. Storage pods filled with the remains of past hunts, Not just human trophies, but alien species from other worlds, preserved specimens demonstrating the sheer duration and scope of the Predator's intergalactic collection. It was a museum of slaughter, a testament to the fact that for Royce and his comrades, Earth was just one small, particularly favored hunting reserve. Suddenly, a chilling sound echoed through the shaft ahead, a scraping noise, followed by a low, guttural clicking that was distinctly not the lead hunter. "Something else is down here," Isabel hissed, freezing. Royce recognized the sound from their time in the jungle, the distressed, primitive rattling of the exiled, bad-blood predator. It seemed the creatures were not entirely unified. Perhaps the less technologically advanced outcast was scavenging or hiding in the neglected lower levels of the ship, equally aware that the main crew would view it as a liability or a pest. The proximity of the wounded alien presented a dangerous choice. Engage a known, albeit primitive, threat, or risk interception by the technologically superior hunters who were surely tracking the power failure. Royce made the tactical decision instantly. In this environment, a known variable, even a hostile one, was preferable to the invisible, overwhelming might of the primary enemy. He signaled Isabel to hold position, drawing a deep breath. He wasn't just fighting for escape now. He was fighting for control of his immediate operational space, ready to turn the hunter's own messy internal politics against them. The air in the maintenance shaft was thick with the alien stench of ozone and stale biomatter, a visceral contrast to the clean, sterile hallways above. Royce gripped the edge of the ductwork, his focus entirely on the guttural clicking sound emanating from the darkness ahead. The presence of the exiled predator, the bad blood, was a profound complication. It represented a break in the monolith of the enemy, but also an unpredictable explosion risk in a confined space. For Royce, a man who excelled in asymmetric warfare, this outcast was a weapon waiting to be turned, even if it was entirely unaware of its utility. Isabel positioned herself behind him, her breathing shallow but controlled. She understood the calculus. The main hunters would prioritize restoring system integrity and capturing the defectors, not necessarily engaging a known rogue creature in a utility conduit unless absolutely necessary. The bad blood, fighting with brute force and primal rage, was susceptible to environmental traps that the technologically superior predators would ignore. As they edged forward, the silhouette of the wounded predator became visible. It was larger, bulkier than the ones they had faced, its biomask scarred, its movements less fluid, more burdened. It was hunched over a piece of discarded piping, seemingly attempting to repair or sharpen it. A bizarre display of desperate ingenuity in a technological wasteland. Royce made his move not with aggression, but with calculated noise. He purposefully scraped his boot against a loose rivet, the sound echoing loudly in the metal tube. The bad blood instantly snapped its head up, its posture shifting from scavenging to immediate combat readiness, ignoring the finer details of the environment in favor of the loudest intrusion. "Now, Isabel," Royce hissed. While the outcast's attention was fixed on the source of the noise, Royce and Isabel's position at the entrance of the shaft, Isabel executed her maneuver. She used her small pry tool not on the wall, but on the locking mechanism of a nearby coolant vent access port, which she had noted earlier was slightly misaligned. With a sharp twist, she forced the port open a fraction, aiming the resulting jet of super-chilled gas directly at the bad blood's path of retreat. The rogue predator roared, a sound of pain and disorientation rather than aggression, as the freezing gas hit its flank. It wasn't lethal, but it was intensely painful, causing the creature to flinch violently and stumble sideways, momentarily losing its footing on the narrow shaft floor. This momentary lapse was all Royce needed. He charged forward, not aiming for a killing blow, but for leverage. He slammed his shoulder into the creature's exposed side, driving it hard against the opposite duct wall. The goal wasn't to kill it here, but to force it into a panicked retreat deeper into the ship's forgotten recesses, away from the main traffic areas. The bad blood, confused by the sudden, coordinated assault from creatures it associated with the primary hunters, reacted with primal fear, scrambling further down the darkened conduit system away from the perceived immediate threat. Royce pulled back, adrenaline surging, his hands shaking slightly from the exertion and proximity to the raw alien biology. That bought us minutes, maybe less. Isabel sealed the coolant vent as best she could. We need to move faster. They'll sweep this section now that the power variance is resolved. They scrambled onward, fueled by the desperate knowledge that they had briefly controlled a variable in the Predator's meticulously planned environment. They had used the enemy's internal inconsistencies against itself. Reaching the cargo hold felt less like a stroke of luck and more like a targeted objective. When they finally dropped out of the maintenance access hatch onto the dimly lit floor of the storage bay, the sight of their confiscated gear, the familiar weight of human weaponry against the alien backdrop, felt like regaining a lost limb. Royce hefted his rifle, the familiar stock feeling right in his hands, a defiant assertion of human capability amidst the silent testament to alien dominance. They were armed, they were loose, and the supervisors above would soon realize that their specimens were not merely observing the cage, they were dismantling it. The narrative of Predators, standing as a sequel and significant reimagining of the foundational 1987 film, effectively transplants the familiar terror of the Yautja hunt into a new, deliberately hostile ecosystem. Director Nimrod Antal, whose prior work, like Control, demonstrated an ability to build claustrophobic, character-driven tension within confined spaces, successfully adapts this ethos to the open, yet enclosed environment of the alien game preserve planet. The film immediately establishes its core conceit: a collection of Earth's most dangerous human predators, soldiers, mercenaries, cartel enforcers, and even a Black Ops assassin are abducted and dropped onto a world designed specifically for their extermination. The ensemble cast forms a fascinating microcosm of human apex behavior. Adrien Brody's Royce, the implied protagonist, carries the weight of his special forces background, exhibiting a weary pragmatism reminiscent of cinematic military archetypes who have seen too much. His leadership is born not of charisma, but necessity. He is the best equipped to analyze the immediate threat. Contrast this with Topher Grace's Edwin, the seemingly innocuous doctor who reveals himself, perhaps too late, to be a clandestine operative, mirroring the film's theme that danger often wears the least threatening disguise. The inclusion of figures like the Yakuza operative Kenji and the seemingly unhinged Russian soldier Stalker ensures that the human antagonists immediately become prey, their own practiced violence rendered largely ineffective against an enemy that adheres to a superior, predatory protocol. The introduction of the Falconers, the human beings who have been stranded on the game, preserved for years, serves a crucial narrative function. Led by Lawrence Fishburne's enigmatic No, they represent a survival state bordering on madness. Their existence offers a grim warning to Royce's group. Adaptation to the hunter's environment leads not to victory, but to a slow, psychological decay, or worse, a willing servitude to the Yautja's rules. No's decision to remain, embracing a form of learned helplessness, contrasts sharply with Royce's immediate, aggressive refusal to accept the role of the hunted. The film's central thematic success lies in its sophisticated portrayal of the Yautja hierarchy. The introduction of the predator species, known as the super predators, larger, physically more imposing, and notably devoid of the ritualistic honor code exhibited by the original film's creature, deepens the lore. These new antagonists seem to operate outside the strictures of the classic predator hunting game, suggesting internal tribal conflict among the alien hunters themselves. This external conflict among the hunters inadvertently provides the surviving humans with a tactical advantage, allowing them to exploit the ancient animosities between the two Yautja factions. The visual language powerfully reinforces the sense of displacement. The jungle setting is oppressive, yet the predator's mastery over the landscape, utilizing advanced cloaking technology and high ground advantages, consistently reminds the audience of the technological gulf. The eventual confrontation in the Yautja camp, a collection of trophies and primitive structures, is a masterstroke of world-building, confirming that this planet is not merely a hunting ground, but a carefully curated zoo where species deemed worthy of the chase are deposited. Ultimately, Predators functions as a study in applied survivalism. It strips away societal comforts and reveals the innate strategies each character employs when faced with an absolute, inescapable threat. Royce's arc is the successful rejection of the hunter mentality in favor of tactical partnership with the less overtly aggressive classic Predator variant that appears later in the film. By teaming up with the honorable Yautja against the barbaric super predators, Royce and the remaining survivors temporarily redefine the game, leveraging one predator's code against another's savagery to achieve escape. A temporary victory rooted not in overwhelming force, but in nuanced understanding of the adversary's complex, often contradictory rules. The visceral immediacy of the opening sequence, where the characters awaken disoriented and tethered to their parachute harnesses descending toward an unknown hell, immediately locks the viewer into the protagonist's confusion and terror. Royce's initial, almost instinctual assessment of his surroundings, the oppressive humidity, the unfamiliar flora, speaks volumes about his training. He processes data under duress where others panic. His eyes scan for threats, a habit ingrained from his shadowy government contracts, perhaps stemming from operations where the line between hunter and hunted was perpetually blurred even on Earth. This weariness that Brody conveys isn't mere acting. It echoes the archetype of the highly skilled operative who longs for normalcy, but finds himself drawn back into the abyss, a common trope that resonates deeply with audiences familiar with the grim realities painted in films like Zero Dark 30, or even the disillusioned veterans of the Bourne series. Edwin, in stark contrast, initially presents as the intellectual observer, the type of character often placed in suspense thrillers to provide exposition or moral grounding. Grace plays this role with a disarming passivity, leading the audience to share Royce's initial skepticism, but not full mistrust. The reveal of his true capabilities, his calm in the face of extreme violence, his subtle manipulation of the group dynamics, suggests a background perhaps in intelligence gathering or corporate espionage, worlds where observation is weaponized long before a trigger is pulled. His intellectual capability becomes almost as dangerous as the Yautja's plasma casters once his true agenda surfaces, highlighting the film's thesis that the most formidable earthbound predators are often those who hide in plain sight. The dynamic among the human group is fascinating because it's a forced merger of rival apex predators. Isabella, Alice Braga, the Falcon's tracker, brings a specialized, almost spiritual connection to the wilderness that sets her apart from the blunt force of the mercenaries. Her expertise in tracking prey through dense terrain becomes invaluable, offering a necessary bridge between Royce's military rigidity and the organic survivalism needed to read the alien environment. There is a palpable tension between her cautious respect for nature and Royce's aggressive desire to conquer it, a tension that only resolves when they realize they must respect the alien nature of their new reality. The true emotional weight, however, rests on the stark comparison between the two predator factions. The classic predator, the honorable hunter who becomes an uneasy ally, acts as a moral anchor derived from the previous film's mythology. Its visible injuries and reliance on established weaponry suggest adherence to a strict, perhaps decaying, code of conduct. Its very presence underscores the villainy of the super predators, who are depicted with a more bestial, less technologically sophisticated, yet undeniably more physically terrifying appearance. These brutes, with their rudimentary armor and visible disdain for stealth, function as the antithesis of the classic hunter. They are butchers, not sportsmen. This distinction elevates the stakes beyond simple survival. Royce and his team are not just fighting aliens. They are caught in a violent civil war among the apex hunters, forced to root for the less savage option to gain a fighting chance. The inclusion of the giant alien beast that the super predators use as a sort of game reserve guard dog further solidifies their lack of restraint, demonstrating a willingness to use any means necessary, a trait Royce recognizes instantly from his own darker past experiences. The emotional core of the film often surfaces during moments of profound realization regarding the sheer scale of their predicament. When the group first encounters the massive skeletal remains, trophies from previous hunts, the impact on characters like Stalker, the wild-eyed Russian, is immediate and destabilizing. For Stalker, whose entire identity seems tethered to his ability to inflict pain and dominate others through sheer aggression, facing an entity that views his entire life's work as mere sport is a shattering experience. His subsequent descent into frantic, ill-advised attacks against the cloaked hunters is a tragic commentary on the limitations of pure, unrefined brutality against superior strategy and technology. He embodies the Earth predator that cannot adapt its mindset. Isabella's perspective, informed by her experience as a tracker, offers moments of quiet, almost mournful connection to the environment, even as it tries to kill her. Her ability to read signs, broken twigs, disturbed earth, provides the first tangible leads for Royce's team, transitioning them from victims reacting to sudden attacks to proactive analysts studying the battlefield. Her quiet competence acts as a necessary counterweight to Royce's constant high-alert tension. Where Royce is prepared to destroy anything that moves, Isabella seeks to understand the pattern of movement, a crucial step in grasping the Yautja's complex rules of engagement. The dynamic between Royce and the classic predator, once the initial bloodshed subsides and they recognize a shared enemy in the super predators, is built on nonverbal communication and mutual need. This alliance is not born of trust, but of tactical alignment. Royce recognizes in the traditional hunter a professional opponent bound by rules, a concept he understands implicitly from his military background. This shared adherence to a perceived code of conduct, even if that code involves hunting humans, allows them a brief moment of parity. The classic predator's visible struggle against its more savage brethren emphasizes its status as an outcast or perhaps a dissident within its own culture, making it a more sympathetic, albeit still lethal, entity. The planet itself functions as a character, its atmosphere thick with menace. Antal ensures the jungle never feels like a passive backdrop. It is an active participant in the predator's game. The bioluminescent elements and the unnerving sounds serve to continually fray the human character's nerves, magnifying their paranoia. When they finally locate the falconer camp, the sheer squalor and the almost ritualistic preparation for the next hunt, the crude fortifications, the captured indigenous beasts, reinforce the idea that survival here necessitates becoming something less than human, a chilling fate No has already accepted. Royce's ultimate motivation, therefore, shifts from mere survival to escaping with his humanity, or at least his tactical integrity, intact, symbolized by his refusal to simply hide and wait, preferring to challenge the system head-on, using the hunter's tools against them. The final confrontation, moving from the deceptive safety of the jungle canopy to the stark, almost industrial brutality of the super predator's trophy clearing, represents the apex of this thematic exploration into savagery versus structured aggression. Royce, having effectively shed the pretense of being just another mercenary, adopts the role of a guerrilla tactician armed with salvaged alien technology. His mastery over the environment and the captured gear, particularly his utilization of the cloaking device and wrist blades, is a final testament to his superior adaptability, proving that human ingenuity, when paired with high-level field experience, can temporarily level the playing field against technological superiority. The super predator, towering and overtly monstrous, represents raw, unchallenged dominance. Its fighting style is less about ritualistic sport and more about overwhelming, visceral destruction. This contrast forces the audience to re-evaluate the initial threat. The classic predator was dangerous because it was honorable. The super predator is terrifying because it is utterly devoid of constraint. When Royce manages to wound the larger creature, the emotional response is twofold: relief from the immediate threat and a profound recognition that this victory is ephemeral. The super predator's ability to absorb grievous damage speaks to a biological hardiness that pure skill cannot permanently overcome. The decision to have the classic predator sacrifice itself to save Royce, moments before the dropship returns, is narratively essential. It cements the alliance as one of necessity rather than friendship, but it also provides a moral victory for Royce. By witnessing the death of the honorable hunter, Royce understands the ultimate cost of engaging in this game, yet he also gains the necessary leverage to survive. The final shot of Royce being airlifted away, scarred but alive, juxtaposed against the vast, indifferent alien sky, leaves the lingering ambiguity central to the franchise. He survived the hunt, but has he truly escaped the nature of the game? He carries the knowledge of the predator's internal conflicts and their methods, making him a more informed and perhaps more dangerous operative upon his potential return to Earth. The film successfully uses the alien setting not just as a killing field, but as a crucible designed to test the absolute limits of human predatory instinct, ultimately rewarding the most flexible and strategically minded survivor. The aftermath of the rescue, framed by the ascent in the alien dropship, shifts the focus entirely onto the psychological residue of the ordeal. Royce, battered and covered in the viscera of his final opponent, is no longer the pragmatic soldier from the opening. He is something fundamentally altered, forged in the crucible of existential horror. His gaze, when directed toward the departing planet, is not one of triumph, but of cold, calculating assessment. He has learned the playbook of a universe far larger and more indifferent than he previously imagined, a knowledge that sits heavily upon a man already burdened by a lifetime of violence. His quiet acceptance of the dead predator's silent sacrifice speaks to a rare moment of genuine, non-verbal understanding across species lines, a bond forged in shared proximity to death and a mutual aversion to unchecked savagery. The surviving human element, represented solely by Royce and perhaps Isabella, though her final emotional state is left purposefully opaque, carries the burden of witness. They have seen the apex of alien brutality and the faded remnants of alien honor. This experience fundamentally invalidates any previous earthbound context for conflict or power. If their prior lives were governed by military ranks, cartel control, or corporate espionage, those hierarchies now seem childishly insignificant. The film suggests that true power is the ability to adapt when all known rules are revoked, a lesson Royce internalized by adopting the Predator's own tools. His very survival implies a willingness to integrate the brutality he fought against, transforming him into a hybrid entity, a human operating with the cold logic of a hunter who has studied his quarry's weaknesses intimately. The emotional resonance of the final moments lies in the silence within the ship. There is no celebration, no debriefing camaraderie. The surviving characters are now inextricably linked by trauma that no civilian life can possibly accommodate. For Royce, the return to civilization is not a relief, but the beginning of a new, more insidious phase of the game. He now possesses intelligence, the knowledge of the Yautja hierarchy, their weaknesses, and their methods of selection, that makes him a uniquely dangerous asset or liability. The film closes not on a note of closure, but on the chilling possibility that the game has simply been paused, and the most dangerous predator to emerge from the jungle might just be the one who learned how to kill using the hunter's own advanced arsenal. His journey from reluctant leader to alien weaponized survivor ensures that the legacy of predators is one defined by necessary corruption in the face of overwhelming external threat. The lingering shot of Royce in the transport vessel emphasizes the profound isolation that accompanies true survival against overwhelming odds. His physical state, scratched, bruised, clad in salvaged alien armor pieces, is a visual manifestation of his psychological transformation. He has literally worn the skin of his adversary, a symbolic appropriation of power that goes beyond mere looting. This act mirrors the narrative structure of the film itself, borrowing heavily from the original 1987 blueprint, while adapting it to a grittier, more cynical modern sensibility, much like the darker espionage thrillers of the early 21st century. Royce embodies this adaptation. He is the ultimate product of the game preserve, refined by necessity. Isabella, if she is indeed the sole other survivor accompanying him, offers the necessary counterpoint to Royce's hardened pragmatism. While Royce seeks tactical advantage, Isabella possesses the deep-seated, almost spiritual respect for the natural order, even an alien one, that might temper his ruthlessness. If she survived, her perspective would be focused on the inherent cruelty of the system that engineered their suffering, perhaps viewing the alliance with the classic predator as a necessary yet deeply unsettling compromise with savagery. Her presence ensures that the ending isn't a purely masculine celebration of brute force, but a complex survival achieved through varied skill sets, acknowledging the necessary role of observation and intuition alongside direct combat prowess. The true thematic triumph of Predators lies in its successful integration of the lore, established by the previous installments, while simultaneously expanding the universe's socio-political framework. By introducing the super predators as an unruly, dishonorable faction, the film manages to inject immediate, high-stakes internal conflict into the Yautja mythology. This avoids the repetition of a single, unstoppable alien threat, and instead posits the predators as a civilization with internal strata, rivalries, and even a concept of barbarism that their more classic counterparts adhere to. This revelation fundamentally changes how the audience perceives the franchise's mythology. The hunt is not just a universal ritual, but one subject to cultural deviation and decline. The film, through its brutal efficiency, functions as a distilled commentary on modern warfare and mercenary culture. The characters selected, a cartel hitman, a black ops sniper, a tracker, an assassin, are all individuals who have monetized violence, or existed at its sharpest edges on Earth. Dropping them into the alien preserve serves as a hyperbolic judgment on their chosen professions. On Earth, they were the top of the food chain. Here, they are merely high-quality livestock. Royce's eventual victory is not just a survival story, but a victory of the most adaptable, most ruthless survivalist mentality. One capable of learning, betraying, and ultimately weaponizing the enemy's own operational procedures. The silence in the final moments is the sound of that realization settling. The game never ends, it just changes arenas and opponents. The lingering atmosphere of dread permeating the final moments is crucial, suggesting that the return to Earth will be anything but a reunion with normalcy. Royce, now armed with the intimate knowledge of Yautja hunting protocols and possibly possessing salvaged Yautja technology, becomes a walking repository of dangerous secrets. This echoes the classic narrative of the shell-shocked soldier who returns from a clandestine war only to find the civilian world utterly incapable of comprehending his reality. His demeanor suggests a man who has peered into the abyss and found that the abyss possesses superior organizational structure. This intellectual threat, the acquisition of enemy intelligence, is arguably more potent than the physical scars he bears. He is no longer merely reacting to threats. He is equipped to anticipate the structure behind them. Isabella's role in this grim awakening is perhaps to maintain a sliver of ethical grounding, although the film wisely leaves her ultimate allegiance and emotional state ambiguous. If she remains silent, it implies a shared understanding with Royce that speaking of what transpired would be futile, or worse, actively dangerous. Their shared experience transcends typical bonding. They have witnessed a cosmic hierarchy where human beings are rated solely on their capacity to provide sport. For Isabella, the tracker, this might confirm a deep-seated suspicion that civilization is merely a thin veneer over primal hierarchies, a suspicion she previously projected onto Earth's untamed wildernesses. The film's success in expanding the Predator lore via the super predators must be acknowledged as its most significant narrative contribution. The super predators operate less like honorable hunters and more like barbaric overseers, or perhaps even a marginalized, exiled clan of Yautja who have devolved into pure slaughterers. This internal conflict humanizes the larger alien society by showing it is not monolithic. There is a bad predator and a less bad predator, forcing the human survivors to make moral calculations in the heat of survival. A far more complex scenario than a simple monster movie. This narrative choice transforms the super predators into symbols of unchecked, technologically advanced sadism, an entity that even the classic predators seemingly disdain. Ultimately, Predators works as a brutal, cynical inversion of the hero's journey. Royce does not return enlightened in a positive sense. He returns hardened, compromised, and uniquely skilled in the art of alien predation. The film posits that, in an environment of absolute, existential threat, the most successful human archetype is the one who can seamlessly integrate the enemy's ruthlessness into his own survival strategy. The final ambiguity, whether Royce will use this knowledge to protect humanity or simply to dominate his next, smaller-scale conflict, leaves the audience with a profound sense of unease, perfectly aligning with the franchise's established tone of perpetual paranoia. The game has merely relocated. The enduring impact of Predators hinges significantly on its successful creation of a self-contained, brutally efficient microcosm of lethal human behavior set against an alien backdrop. The film functions as an anthropological study where the Yautja are not merely monsters, but extremely sophisticated evolutionary biologists employing human specimens to gauge terrestrial apex aggression. The characters chosen, each at the zenith of their specific, often destructive, human skill set, are instantly recognizable archetypes of contemporary terrestrial predation. The highly trained military operative, the covert intelligence agent, the ruthless cartel enforcer. Their initial interactions are fraught with the distrust endemic to groups composed entirely of self-serving apex predators, a tension that only momentarily subsides when faced with a universally greater threat. Noland, the veteran falconer, represents the tragic endpoint of this forced evolution. His prolonged isolation and eventual assimilation into the role of the Yautja's servant or early warning system illustrate the ultimate psychological cost of being perpetually hunted. His madness is not random. It is a learned response to an environment where vigilance is the only currency, and that vigilance has ultimately enslaved him to the game's masters. When Royce and his group encounter Noland, they are looking into a potential future, a life spent scrambling in the shadows, obeying the whistle of the hunters. This foreshadowing galvanizes Royce's determination to fight on the hunter's terms, rather than succumb to Noland's passive terror. The tactical brilliance of the surviving group, Royce, Isabella, and eventually the classic Predator ally, stems from their ability to shift allegiance and understanding mid-conflict. Royce's realization that the honorable Predator adheres to a code that excludes the super predators transforms the conflict from a desperate flight into a complex tactical maneuver. This mirrors high-level real-world military doctrine, where exploiting internal divisions within an enemy faction often proves more effective than frontal assault. By using the environment, the indigenous megafauna, like the hellhounds, and the very weapons of their adversaries, the survivors demonstrate a flexibility that the more rigidly programmed super predators lack. They weaponize surprise and the inherent rules of the game against the rule breakers. Furthermore, the film's pacing, driven by Antal's preference for sustained tension over constant action, ensures that when violence erupts, it carries maximum weight. The moments of quiet, where characters are simply moving through the oppressive jungle, listening, feeling the unseen pressure, are as important as the plasma fire exchanges. This measured approach respects the inherent stealth and patience of the Yautja mythology, contrasting sharply with action films that favor relentless spectacle. The feeling that the jungle itself is watching, comprised of hidden sensors and tripwires, keeps the audience perpetually on edge, recognizing that in this environment, the slightest lapse in situational awareness means instant death and a new trophy for the collection. The final success is thus not just about killing the biggest alien, but about successfully navigating the intricate, lethal curriculum designed for them. The visual design of the super predators further cements their thematic role as corrupted outliers within the Yautja culture. Their armor is visibly rougher, bulkier, and appears more functional than ritualistic, lacking the intricate ceremonial etchings often associated with the classic honorable hunter. This physical disparity telegraphs their behavioral differences immediately. They are brutes employing advanced technology without the guiding philosophy of the hunt. They represent the devolution of a sophisticated culture into mere slaughter, a cautionary